farmer's daughter was kept locked inside an outhouse. Until a lonely lumberjack found her, Eliza woke up to the sound of the cold wind rattling the wooden walls of the outhouse. She blinked her eyes, trying to adjust to the dim light that slipped through the small cracks in the walls. The outhouse was small and cramped, and every day felt longer than the last. She had spent countless hours staring at the rough wooden walls, imagining what life could be like outside. The smell of damp earth and the faint stench of old wood filled the room, and she tried not to think about it too much. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she could almost feel the sunlight on her skin or hear the laughter of children from a world she had never known. Her father's farm was far away from any village, surrounded by thick forests and endless fields. The isolation had been total ever since she could remember. There were no friends to visit, no teachers to guide her, and no neighbors she could trust. Every sound beyond the farm's boundary made her heart race. Birds singing, the rustle of leaves, even the sound of wind carried a strange mixture of hope and fear. She longed to feel the grass beneath her feet and to run freely under the sky, but those things were only dreams. Her father, Mr. Harlow, was a harsh man with sharp eyes and a voice that could send shivers down her spine. He often told her that the outside world was dangerous, full of people who would take advantage of her if she ever left the farm. That was why he had built the outhouse in a hidden corner of the yard, claiming it was for her safety. He would sometimes bring her food through a small window, a loaf of bread or a cup of water, but he never lingered. His presence was always sharp, always tense, and Eliza learned to anticipate his moods. A simple misstep or a question could make him angry, and she had learned to nod silently, to keep her eyes down, and to obey without hesitation. Days and nights blurred together in the small room. Eliza kept herself busy by observing the tiny details of her surroundings. She noticed how the light shifted during the day, how the wind whispered through the cracks, and how a small spider had built a delicate web in one corner. She even started talking to the spider sometimes, imagining it was a friend. These small rituals helped her keep her mind active and her hope alive. In the quietest moments, she wrote little stories in her imagination, pretending she could escape and live in a world filled with green fields, rivers, and people who smiled instead of scowled. Even though the outhouse was a place of confinement, it also became a place where Eliza's mind could wander. She remembered stories her mother had told her when she was very young, stories of distant lands, brave girls, and people helping one another. Those memories were faint now, but they still gave her courage. She would whisper them softly to herself, letting the words sink in and strengthen her resolve. But not every day was filled with hope. Some days, the loneliness was unbearable. The silence pressed down on her, and the walls seemed to close in. She would cry quietly, her tears leaving small marks on the wooden floor. She would press her face against the cracks to see the sunlight outside, imagining the world she was missing. She longed to hear voices, to hear someone speak kindly to her, even if only for a moment. Eliza began to pay attention to every sound outside the outhouse. She listened for footsteps on the dirt paths, the creak of wagon wheels, and the distant calls of people in the forest. Each sound made her heart race with both fear and hope. Sometimes she would press her ear against the wall, straining to hear anything that might tell her she was not entirely alone in the world. These moments of listening became her small connection to life beyond her prison. Food was always a worry. Her father would bring it, but it was never enough. Sometimes it would be a stale piece of bread, other times a small bowl of porridge that barely filled her stomach. She learned to eat slowly, to make each bite last, and to treasure the water he left. She would imagine the taste of fresh fruit, vegetables, or milk, things she had never truly known. Even though hunger was constant, It made her imagination stronger. She would dream of walking through orchards, picking ripe apples, and feeling the juice on her fingers. Eliza also started to notice small signs of life that reminded her she was not completely alone. Birds perched on the fence outside, rabbits hopped across the field, and deer could sometimes be seen at the edge of the forest. She would watch them for hours, imagining that one day she too could move freely like them. Nature became her secret companion, giving her comfort in moments of despair. She learned to listen to the patterns of the wind, the changes in the seasons, and the way sunlight fell across the farm. These details were her small window to the outside world. Despite everything, Eliza never gave up hope. She remembered her mother's gentle smile and kind words, even though it had been years since she had seen her. Those memories became her motivation. She whispered promises to herself each night, telling herself that one day she would see the world beyond the farm, that one day she would feel free. She imagined meeting kind people, learning new things, and discovering places she had only dreamed of. But her father's strictness was always a shadow over her dreams. He patrolled the farm with sharp eyes, making sure she did not wander or disobey. Even small acts, like peeking outside or moving quietly through the outhouse, were dangerous. She had to be careful, patient, and silent. Each day was a balance between survival and the desire for freedom. The fear was constant, but it also taught her resilience. She became alert, observant, and cautious. Some nights Eliza would hear noises that filled her with both dread and curiosity: the crackling of the fire in the distance, the faint sound of footsteps on wooden planks, and sometimes even the low murmur of voices carried across the farm. She wondered who these people were, and if they were kind. She imagined speaking to them, asking questions, and learning about the world she had been denied. Each sound reminded her that there was life beyond the outhouse, a life she longed to join. In these moments, Eliza's imagination became her strength. She created stories in her mind about brave girls escaping from impossible situations, finding friends, and building new lives. She pictured herself walking through forests, meeting people who smiled at her, and discovering the beauty of the world she had only glimpsed through cracks in the wooden walls. These stories became her secret treasure, a private world where hope could grow. Even with all the hardships, there were tiny victories. She learned to make herself comfortable in the small space, using scraps of cloth to soften the wooden floor. She discovered that certain spots in the outhouse caught the sunlight at specific times, and she would sit there, letting the warmth touch her skin. These small moments reminded her that she could find comfort even in the harshest conditions. Through it all, Eliza held on to the belief that one day she would be free. She imagined feeling the grass under her feet, the wind in her hair, and the warmth of the sun on her face. She imagined speaking to someone who would treat her kindly, seeing a river glisten in the sunlight, and hearing the laughter of children in the distance. These dreams fueled her, giving her courage to endure another day in captivity. Eliza knew that freedom would not come easily, but she had begun to plan in her mind. She paid attention to the routines of the farm, the movements of her father, and the sounds of visitors or travelers passing nearby. Every detail became a clue, every sound a possible opportunity. Deep down, she believed that if she stayed patient and clever, the day would come when she could step out of the outhouse and into the world she had longed to see. Though fear and loneliness were constant companions, so was hope. Hope had kept her alive, nourished her spirit, and given her the strength to endure the harshest days. Eliza's mind was alive with imagination, her heart filled with courage, and her soul longing for freedom. She knew that one day the wind that whispered through the cracks of the outhouse would carry her into a world where she could finally live, laugh, and belong. Until then, she held tightly to her dreams, knowing that they were the keys to her survival. Eliza's life on the farm grew harsher as the days went by. Her father, Mr. Harlow, was not a man who showed kindness easily. His stern face and sharp eyes seemed to see through every thought she had, every secret she tried to keep. Even the smallest mistake could make him angry. He had a strict routine, one that he expected her to follow without question. Breakfast, chores, and the little visits to the outhouse for food were all timed carefully, leaving Eliza with almost no freedom. The farm itself was a rough and unforgiving place. The fields were wide, stretching farther than her eyes could reach, and they were filled with hard soil that needed constant labor. Trees grew thickly along the edges of the property, and during winter snow would cover everything, leaving the land cold and silent. Eliza would sometimes press her hands against the wooden walls of the outhouse and imagine touching the world outside. She longed to feel the soft grass beneath her fingers, the warmth of the sun on her face, or the cool water of a stream running through the forest. These thoughts were both a comfort and a torment, reminding her of the life she had never truly experienced. Her father's behavior grew more unpredictable. Some days he would seem almost normal, speaking to her in a low voice, bringing slightly better food, or leaving her a blanket to make the nights more bearable. Other days his temper flared for no reason she could understand. He would yell at her for spilling water, for asking a question, or simply for looking out the small cracks of the outhouse too long. Eliza learned to tread carefully, to read his moods like a map, and to respond with silence when anger was near. She became quiet, thoughtful, and cautious. Every action had to be measured, every word chosen carefully. Even though life was difficult, Eliza began to observe the world in small ways. She noticed how her father moved through the farm, how the chickens ran when he approached, and how the cows would quiet down when he was angry. She memorized these routines because she knew that understanding them could be the key to her survival. She began imagining that one day, if she ever had the chance, she could use this knowledge to escape. Each small detail became important: when he left the house, when he was distracted, and how long he spent doing certain tasks. At night, the outhouse was both a prison and a sanctuary. The cold wooden walls creaked in the wind, but inside, Eliza could hear the world outside in tiny fragments. She could hear the rustling of leaves, the distant sound of a dog barking, and the soft whisper of the wind. These sounds were like little reminders that life continued beyond her confinement. Sometimes she pressed her ear to the cracks in the wall and imagined what it would be like to be out there, walking freely among the trees and open fields. The thought filled her with longing, but it also strengthened her determination. Food remained a constant concern. Her father would sometimes leave bread that was hard and dry, or a small bowl of porridge that barely filled her stomach. On some days, she would not receive enough, and her hunger would gnaw at her relentlessly. She learned to ration what little she had, taking small bites and savoring each one. Even in hunger, she imagined feasts of fresh fruits, milk, and warm bread. She would picture herself picking apples from trees, watching the milk flow from a cow, and enjoying the taste of food without fear or restriction. These mental images became her secret source of hope. Eliza also learned to keep track of time in her own way. She marked days by observing shadows, the position of the sun, and the sound of the wind through the trees. Each passing day was both a challenge and a tiny victory. She counted the days silently, imagining that one day, when the right moment came, she could leave the outhouse and step into the world she had longed to see. The act of counting became a small ritual, helping her maintain hope and sanity. Despite her fear and isolation, she began to notice small signs of life beyond her prison. Birds landed on the fence posts, squirrels ran along the tree branches, and the occasional deer appeared at the edge of the forest. She watched them for hours, imagining that one day she too could move freely like them. These moments gave her comfort and reminded her that life existed outside the walls that confined her. Nature became a secret friend, a source of strength she could always rely on. Her father, however, remained a constant threat. He seemed to have little patience for curiosity or independence. He would check on her frequently, his eyes scanning every corner of the outhouse, making sure she had not hidden anything or tried to escape. He never smiled, never softened his voice, and rarely spoke in a way that felt human. His presence was a weight, a shadow over every thought and every action she took. Eliza learned to hide her emotions, to suppress her fear and anger, and to obey without question. In these moments of strict control, her imagination became her greatest ally. She would create stories in her mind, picturing herself escaping the farm, meeting kind people, and exploring the world she had never known. She imagined walking through forests, feeling the sun on her face, and hearing the laughter of children. These fantasies were vivid and detailed, almost as real as her surroundings. They kept her spirits alive and gave her the courage to endure another day in captivity. Sometimes she would catch glimpses of travelers passing near the farm. She could see their shadows through the trees or hear the faint sound of their voices. These brief glimpses were tantalizing, filling her with both fear and hope. She wondered who they were, where they were going, and whether they could ever help her. These thoughts fueled her imagination, inspiring dreams of freedom that seemed almost within reach. Her father's strictness also taught her important skills. She became observant, patient, and clever. She learned to notice small details that others might miss, to read the behavior of animals and humans, and to anticipate danger. These skills would become essential if she ever had a chance to escape. Each day she grew stronger, both mentally and emotionally, even in the midst of hardship. Despite everything, Eliza never stopped hoping. She remembered her mother's stories and gentle words, even though it had been many years since she had seen her. These memories were like a light in the darkness, guiding her through the long, lonely days. She whispered them to herself, letting the words remind her that a better life was possible. These moments of reflection gave her strength and reminded her that she was not completely alone, even if her father's presence made her feel trapped. At night, when the wind howled and the farm was silent, Eliza would plan in her mind. She thought about the routines of her father, the layout of the farm, and the times when he would be away. She imagined herself slipping quietly from the outhouse, moving through the forest, and finding safety. Each plan was a small act of rebellion, a way to assert her independence even while confined. These mental exercises kept her sharp and ready for the day when she could act. Her hope grew stronger as she observed small patterns. She noticed the times her father would go into the fields, the sounds of the animals, and the way the wind shifted. Each detail became a piece of a larger puzzle, a map that she would one day use to find freedom. She imagined meeting someone kind, someone who would help her escape and protect her. The thought of being rescued gave her heart a spark of joy that she had not felt in years. Eliza also began to dream about life beyond survival. She imagined learning new things, meeting friends, and exploring new places. She pictured herself walking in a world where she could make choices, laugh without fear, and feel safe. These dreams became a source of motivation, reminding her that even in the darkest times, there was hope. Through all the hardships, the cold, the hunger, and the fear, Eliza held on to the belief that one day she would be free. The outhouse, though small and confining, had become a place of reflection, planning, and imagination. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to prepare for a life beyond the farm. Her mind was alive with thoughts of escape, freedom, and discovery. Her heart was filled with courage, and her spirit refused to be broken. Eliza knew that patience was her greatest weapon. She could not rush, she could not make mistakes, and she had to be clever. But she also knew that the world outside was waiting, filled with possibilities she could barely imagine. Each day in the outhouse was a test of endurance, observation, and hope, and each day she passed that test with quiet determination, dreaming of the day she would finally step into a life she could call her own. Eliza had begun to notice a change in the rhythm of the farm. Her father, Mr. Harlow, had been spending more time in the distant fields, cutting wood and repairing fences. This small shift gave her hope, even though she did not yet know why. Every morning she would press her ear to the cracks in the wooden walls, listening carefully to the sounds of the farm. She was alert to the tiniest noises, hoping to catch anything that hinted at life beyond her prison. One morning she heard something unusual. The sound of chopping wood, strong and steady, came from the edge of the forest. It was different from the occasional noises of the farm. Curious, she pressed closer to the cracks and listened. The rhythm was methodical, almost like a heartbeat, steady and calm. She could hear the snap of branches and the distant call of a bird startled by the movement. The sound fascinated her, and for the first time in years, she felt a spark of curiosity that outweighed her fear. Days passed, and the sound became familiar. Eliza realized that it was the work of someone new. Whoever it was, they moved carefully, almost quietly, leaving only faint traces in the dirt and grass. Her mind raced with possibilities. Who could this be? A traveler? A kind stranger? She felt both fear and hope rise together. Her father never welcomed strangers, and the thought of someone entering the farm was frightening. Yet she longed to meet another human being who might understand her situation. Then she saw him. From her small window, she caught a glimpse of a man moving through the forest. He carried a large axe and wore a worn coat, his face partially hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. His movements were strong and confident, yet calm. He seemed at home among the trees, moving with a quiet respect for the land around him. Eliza watched him for hours in secret, noting the way he paused to look around, the careful way he cut branches, and the gentle way he interacted with the animals he encountered. This man was Thomas, a lumberjack who had lived near the edge of the forest for many years. He was known to travel the woods in search of strong timber, living alone in a small cabin far from any village. Thomas had his own quiet loneliness. Years of solitude had made him reflective and cautious. He worked hard each day, chopping wood and carrying heavy logs, but he longed for connection, for someone to share a kind word or a simple meal. He did not know that just beyond the trees a young girl was observing him, her heart filled with hope and fear. Eliza began to watch Thomas more closely. She noticed the careful way he marked trees before cutting, the skill in his movements, and the small kindnesses he showed to animals along the way. There was a gentleness in him that she had never seen in her father. She imagined speaking to him, telling him about the outhouse, and asking for help. Her heart leapt with a mix of fear and anticipation. Could this man be the one who would help her escape the life she had known for so long? Over time, Eliza found small ways to communicate without being seen. She would leave marks on the ground near the edge of the forest, hoping Thomas might notice. A small pile of sticks arranged in a pattern, or a leaf carefully placed in the shape of an arrow, became her secret language. Each day she waited anxiously for him to see them, hoping that he would understand her desire for help. These small gestures were dangerous, but they also gave her hope and a sense of agency in her otherwise confined life. Thomas, for his part, was observant and thoughtful. He noticed the small marks near the trees and began to sense that someone had been there. At first he thought it might be a forest animal, but the patterns were too deliberate. He began to watch more closely, moving quietly through the forest, his sharp eyes scanning the undergrowth. One day he heard a faint sound, barely more than a whisper. He froze, listening intently, and realized it was a human voice, weak and frightened, coming from the farm's direction. Curiosity and concern drove Thomas to investigate. He moved carefully, avoiding the rough paths that would make noise, and approached the edge of the farm. From his vantage point behind the trees, he could see a small outhouse in the far corner of the property. He noticed the subtle signs of someone inside: shadows moving behind the wooden walls, the faint outline of a small hand pressed against a crack. His heart ached for the child trapped there. He could see the fear in her movements and the longing for freedom that radiated from her every gesture. Eliza, sensing that someone had noticed her, felt a mixture of fear and hope. Her father could not discover this stranger, or punishment would follow. Yet she dared to hope that this man might be her chance to escape. She watched him from her tiny window, her heart pounding as he moved quietly toward the outhouse, stopping to observe before retreating back into the trees. It was a dangerous dance of caution and trust, and every moment was filled with tension. Over the following days, Thomas continued to visit the edge of the forest, always careful not to be seen. He would leave small tokens of kindness, a piece of bread, a bundle of firewood, or even just a soft note carved on a tree trunk. Each gesture was meant to reassure Eliza that he was trustworthy and that he understood her plight. These small acts became her lifeline, giving her hope and courage. She began to plan in her mind, imagining how she might escape with his help. Eliza also began to communicate with Thomas in secret. She found ways to leave tiny notes through cracks in the outhouse walls or by arranging objects in patterns he could understand. Each note was a message of hope, a plea for help, or a simple expression of her desire for freedom. Thomas would respond in kind, leaving signs that she could see without being caught. Slowly, a quiet trust grew between them, a bond formed from careful observation, understanding, and mutual desire for connection. As the days passed, Eliza's courage grew. She started to imagine what life could be like if she could finally leave the outhouse. She pictured walking through the forest with Thomas, feeling the sun on her face and breathing freely for the first time in her life. She imagined discovering streams, meadows, and small villages, meeting people who would treat her with kindness. These thoughts filled her with determination and strengthened her resolve to escape. Thomas, too, felt a growing responsibility for the girl. He thought about the dangers she faced daily and the cruelty of her father. Each time he left small signs or gifts, he reminded himself to be patient, careful, and strategic. He knew that a rushed attempt could endanger her, and he wanted to ensure that when the moment came, it would be safe and successful. His quiet strength and steady presence became a beacon of hope for Eliza. The forest became a place of secrecy and planning. Eliza and Thomas relied on the natural cover of trees, shrubs, and shadows to communicate and observe without being discovered. Each interaction was filled with tension as they navigated the risks posed by her father's strict vigilance. Yet every small success, every moment of understanding, strengthened their connection and fueled their determination to achieve freedom. Eliza began to see herself not as a trapped child, but as someone capable of cleverness, patience, and courage. She learned to trust her instincts and to read the movements of both her father and Thomas. Each day she practiced restraint, observation, and careful planning, preparing for the moment when escape would be possible. Her imagination and intelligence became her greatest tools, allowing her to envision a world beyond confinement. Finally, a quiet plan began to take shape. Eliza and Thomas imagined a way for her to slip out of the outhouse unnoticed, using the natural cover of the forest and Thomas's knowledge of the land. They would wait for the right moment, when her father was far in the fields or otherwise distracted, and act with careful precision. The plan required patience, trust, and courage, but both of them knew it was possible. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. Eliza found comfort in knowing that someone outside the outhouse cared for her and understood her plight. Thomas felt a sense of purpose and connection he had not experienced in years. Together they began to imagine a life beyond fear, a life filled with freedom, sunlight, and possibility. Eliza's heart was filled with a quiet excitement. The presence of Thomas, his kindness, and the small gestures of support gave her hope that had been missing for years. She began to believe that one day she would walk free, feel the wind on her face, and experience the world she had only dreamed of. Every sound in the forest, every shadow behind the trees, became part of the plan and a symbol of hope. Eliza's heart raced with every sound she heard that day. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the distant cries of birds and the faint clatter of tools from her father's work in the fields. She pressed herself against the wooden walls of the outhouse, her small hands clutching the rough boards as though they could keep her safe. Yet she was no longer alone in spirit. Thomas, the lumberjack from the forest, had become a quiet, guiding presence, and just knowing that someone cared gave her courage. She had begun to notice patterns in her father's movements. He spent long hours in the fields during the day, repairing fences, chopping wood, and tending to the animals. In the early mornings and late evenings, he was more cautious, wandering the farm with suspicion, checking corners and making sure everything was as he wanted. Eliza memorized each routine carefully, noting the times when the yard was empty or when he was focused elsewhere. Every movement became a piece of the puzzle she and Thomas were silently constructing. Thomas visited more often now, moving quietly along the forest's edge, always careful to remain unseen. Sometimes he would leave a small bundle of food or a note carved into the bark of a tree. Other times he simply watched, ensuring that her father had not changed his routine. Eliza waited for these moments with bated breath, peering through the cracks in the outhouse to see if he had come. Each day, the small gestures from Thomas filled her with hope, and each day, she imagined the freedom that could soon be hers. Together, without ever speaking aloud, they began to plan. They used subtle signs to communicate, leaving objects in specific patterns or marks in the dirt. A small pile of sticks arranged in a circle meant safe today, while a single leaf placed in a particular way indicated wait. These secret messages became their language, allowing them to coordinate without alerting her father. It was slow, careful work, but it strengthened their bond and gave Eliza a sense of control she had never experienced. The escape could not be rushed. Eliza knew that if her father discovered even the smallest hint of her plan, he would punish her severely. She spent hours each day observing him, listening to his voice, noting the patterns of his footsteps, and imagining every possible outcome. Thomas encouraged patience, reminding her through subtle signs that a single mistake could ruin everything. The tension between hope and fear was almost unbearable, but it sharpened her focus and determination. Eliza also began to prepare herself mentally and physically. She practiced moving quietly within the small confines of the outhouse, imagining how she would slip through the yard without being noticed. She planned how she would navigate the forest, where to hide, and how to avoid making noise. Each day, she grew more confident, realizing that she could rely on her wits and Thomas's guidance to achieve freedom. The thought of running under the open sky filled her with energy and a sense of purpose she had never known. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Thomas left a larger bundle near the edge of the forest. Eliza peered through the cracks, her eyes widening as she saw a small rope, a note, and a piece of bread. The note was simple but clear. "Tonight, if he is far in the field, it is safe. Be ready." Her heart pounded so hard she thought he might hear it. This was the first real sign that the moment of escape had arrived. She could hardly believe it. After years of confinement, hope was about to become action. The day wore on slowly, each hour stretching longer than the last. Eliza watched her father from the small cracks, noting every step he took. When he left for the fields, carrying his tools and whistling softly, she counted the minutes, measuring the time until the world outside would finally be within her reach. Her mind raced with both excitement and fear. What if something went wrong? What if he returned early? Every possibility had to be considered, and every precaution had to be taken. As evening fell, the forest grew darker, and shadows stretched across the yard. Eliza felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She opened the small window of the outhouse carefully, peering out to make sure the coast was clear. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and wet earth, reminding her of the freedom that awaited. She gathered her courage in the small bundle of supplies Thomas had left: a loaf of bread, a cloth to keep warm, and the rope that might help her climb over the fence if needed. Her movements were slow and deliberate. She did not want to make a sound, knowing that her father's sharp ears could detect the faintest noise. She crept along the side of the outhouse, moving through the tall grass that swayed in the wind. Each step felt like an eternity, and her heart pounded in her chest as if it might give her away. Yet she reminded herself of Thomas's guidance, of the careful observations and preparations that had brought her to this moment. She could do this. She had to do this. Reaching the edge of the farmyard, Eliza paused, listening for any sign that her father had returned. The yard was silent except for the faint rustling of leaves. The stars began to emerge in the sky, and the moon cast a soft glow on the ground. The world outside the outhouse seemed vast and full of possibilities. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold night air fill her lungs. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the culmination of years of hope, patience, and quiet courage. Then she heard it, a soft crunch of footsteps. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to stay still. The sound came closer, but it was not her father. Thomas emerged from the shadows, his presence calm and steady. He held a lantern in one hand and motioned for her to follow quietly. Relief and excitement flooded her body. Finally, she was not alone. Someone she trusted was there to guide her into the world she had dreamed of. Thomas led her carefully through the edge of the forest, moving silently among the trees. The wind whispered through the branches, and the moonlight cast long shadows that helped hide them. Eliza's heart raced with each step, but she also felt a sense of exhilaration. Every movement took her farther from captivity and closer to freedom. She glanced back at the farm, feeling a mix of fear and determination. She was leaving the life she had known for so long, and nothing would ever be the same. The forest was both beautiful and intimidating. Tall trees loomed over them, and the underbrush rustled with small creatures moving in the night. Thomas guided her carefully, pointing out safe paths and warning her of hidden roots or rocks that could trip her. Eliza followed closely, relying on his experience and trusting his guidance completely. The rhythm of their movements became steady, and she began to feel a growing sense of confidence. She was no longer the trapped girl of the outhouse. She was a girl taking her first steps toward freedom. As they moved deeper into the forest, Eliza thought about the life she was leaving behind. The outhouse, the strict routine, the fear of her father. It all seemed unreal now. She remembered the cold walls, the small cracks, and the loneliness that had filled her days. Yet those memories were now tempered by hope and the thrill of escape. She realized that the years of patience, observation, and quiet courage had prepared her for this moment. Every small lesson, every careful observation, had led her to this night. Hours passed as they navigated through the forest. They stopped briefly near a stream where Thomas gave her some water and bread. She ate quickly, savoring the taste of freedom along with the simple meal. Thomas reassured her silently with a nod, and she felt a growing sense of trust and connection. For the first time, she felt that she had an ally, someone who would guide her safely through the unknown. Despite the calm, Eliza could not ignore the lingering fear. Her father could still be searching, and danger was never far away. She stayed alert, moving quietly and carefully, listening to every sound and watching every shadow. Thomas reminded her of patience and caution, teaching her to use her senses and instincts to navigate safely. Each step was both thrilling and nerve-wracking, a delicate balance between fear and freedom. By the time they stopped for the night, Eliza felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She sat under a large tree, looking up at the stars, and for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of possibility. The outhouse and the farm were behind her, and the world was wide and full of opportunities. She thought about what lay ahead, new places, kind people, and the chance to live life on her own terms. Her heart was filled with hope, courage, and gratitude for Thomas, who had become her guide and protector. As she drifted into a light sleep under the trees, Eliza realized that the escape was only the beginning. Challenges and dangers would still come, but she was ready. She had learned patience, observation, courage, and trust. Oh. These skills would guide her through whatever lay ahead. For the first time, she felt the true weight of freedom and the incredible possibilities it offered. Eliza woke with a start, the cold forest night wrapping around her like a soft blanket. She had slept lightly, aware that any sound could mean danger, but for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of safety. Thomas was still nearby, quietly moving through the forest to check their surroundings. The soft glow of dawn began to peek through the trees, painting the leaves with pale gold and silver. For the first time, the world seemed wide and full of promise rather than fear. Her heart swelled with gratitude as she realized how far she had come. The outhouse, the cold walls, the endless days of hunger and fear, those things were behind her now. She had survived years of confinement, using her mind, patience, and courage to endure. But survival alone was no longer enough. She wanted life, freedom, and the chance to make her own choices. The forest, with its rustling leaves and gentle streams, seemed to promise exactly that. Thomas motioned for her to follow, and together they moved carefully through the undergrowth. He guided her around hidden roots and uneven terrain, his experience in the forest invaluable. Eliza followed silently, trusting his every move. Each step took her farther from her father's reach, and closer to the new life she had long dreamed of. The fear that had dominated her days in the outhouse now existed only as a faint shadow, easily overcome by hope and determination. The path through the forest was not easy. They had to navigate thick bushes, slippery stones, and fallen logs, all while avoiding the faint possibility that her father might discover her absence. Eliza's legs ached, and her breath came in short bursts. but the thought of freedom pushed her forward. She imagined herself stepping into a village, meeting people who would smile at her, and finally feeling safe. Every painful step felt like a small victory. As they walked, Thomas spoke softly, telling her about life beyond the farm. He described small villages with friendly people, markets filled with colors and sounds, and fields where children played without fear. Eliza listened eagerly, her mind painting vivid pictures of each story. For the first time, she could imagine a life that was full, warm, and alive. The world was no longer something distant that she dreamed about. It was something real and reachable. After several hours, they reached the edge of the forest, where a small path led toward a village in the distance. Eliza paused for a moment, taking in the view. The sky was brightening, the sun casting long shadows on the ground. She could see smoke rising from chimneys, birds flying freely, and people moving about their daily lives. A thrill of excitement ran through her, mixed with a touch of nervousness. She had never been among so many people before, and yet she felt a strange sense of belonging already. Thomas guided her down the path carefully, reminding her to stay quiet and aware. As they approached the village, Eliza's eyes widened with wonder. The streets were lined with small houses, gardens bursting with flowers, and people going about their morning routines. She felt a mix of relief and disbelief. After so many years of isolation, she was finally surrounded by life. Her heart raced with hope, and a smile crept across her face despite the exhaustion from the long journey. Their arrival in the village marked the beginning of a new chapter. Thomas introduced Eliza to a kindly woman who ran a small inn on the edge of town. The woman welcomed her warmly, offering food, clean clothes, and a place to rest. Eliza felt a wave of emotion she had not experienced in years. Tears filled her eyes as she realized that she was safe, that she was free, and that kindness existed in the world beyond the farm. For the first time, she could breathe fully, without fear. Over the following days, Eliza began to recover from her long ordeal. She ate regularly, bathed in clean water, and slept without the constant fear of punishment. Her body slowly regained strength, and her mind began to feel lighter. She explored the village cautiously at first, observing the people and the rhythms of daily life. She discovered that freedom was not just the absence of confinement, it was the ability to make choices, to speak freely, and to experience the world without fear. Thomas remained by her side, guiding her and offering reassurance. He taught her about the village, helped her navigate new social situations, and reminded her that it was okay to feel both joy and fear at the same time. Eliza realized that freedom came with responsibility, and that she would need courage not just to escape, but to build a new life. With Thomas's support, she began to imagine a future where she could make her own decisions and create a life filled with safety, learning, and friendship. News of Eliza's escape eventually reached her father, though she never returned to the farm. The villagers, upon learning her story, ensured that she would be protected and never forced back into a situation like the one she had endured. While justice was slow and quiet, the focus for Eliza was on the life ahead, not the life she had left behind. She had survived the past, and now the present was hers to shape. Eliza began to attend a small school in the village, eager to learn the things she had missed. Reading, writing, and arithmetic became not just subjects, but symbols of her independence. She met other children and slowly began to make friends, learning what it meant to laugh, play, and interact without fear. Each day was a new adventure, filled with discoveries and small triumphs. The world, once a place of longing and imagination, had become a place of reality and possibility. Despite the challenges of adjusting to a new life, Eliza never forgot the lessons she had learned during her time in confinement. Patience, observation, and courage had carried her through the darkest days, and they continued to guide her in the bright world outside. She knew that the strength she had cultivated within the outhouse would always remain with her, helping her face difficulties and make wise choices. Her past had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. Thomas became a lifelong friend and protector. Their bond, forged in secrecy and danger, grew stronger as Eliza adjusted to freedom. He continued to teach her about the forest, the rhythms of nature, and the ways to stay safe and resourceful. More importantly, he reminded her that kindness, trust, and courage were just as important as strength and skill. Eliza realized that she had not only escaped confinement, but had also gained a mentor and a friend who would guide her as she navigated the world. As months passed, Eliza's confidence and independence grew. She walked freely through the village, explored the surrounding forests, and began to dream of a future filled with choices she could make herself. Her laughter returned, soft at first, then full and unrestrained. She discovered the joy of simple pleasures: sunlight on her face, the warmth of a fire, and the taste of fresh bread. Each small experience was a victory, a reminder that freedom was both a right and a treasure to be cherished. The memory of the outhouse and the years of captivity remained with her, but it no longer held power over her. Instead, it became a testament to her resilience and courage. She had endured hardship, remained patient, and seized the opportunity when it came. The girl who had once been trapped behind wooden walls had grown into someone capable of facing the world, making choices, and embracing life fully. Eliza began to think about the future with excitement. She imagined learning new skills, helping others in need, and perhaps one day returning to the forest with Thomas to explore its hidden places. She knew that life would have challenges, but she also knew that she possessed the strength to face them. The freedom she had fought for was now hers, and every decision she made was a step toward a life she could shape herself. At night, she would sometimes look up at the stars and remember the outhouse, the long days of loneliness, and the small hopes that had kept her going. She smiled softly, grateful for the lessons she had learned and the people who had helped her. Thomas had shown her that courage, patience, and kindness could change everything. The world was no longer a place to fear. It was a place to live, explore, and enjoy. Eliza's story became known in the village, not as a tale of suffering, but as a story of courage and hope. People admired her resilience, her intelligence, and her determination to survive and thrive. She inspired others, showing that even in the darkest circumstances, hope and courage could lead to freedom and a brighter future. Her life had changed forever, and she embraced it fully, knowing that the past had prepared her for the beauty and possibilities of the present. And so Eliza stepped into a world of light and freedom. The outhouse and the farm were far behind her, replaced by the warmth of community, the safety of the village, and the promise of a life she could shape herself. With Thomas as her friend and guide, and with her own courage and intelligence, she faced the future with determination, hope, and the quiet joy of someone who had earned the right to live freely. Every sunrise reminded her of the possibilities ahead, and every step she took was a celebration of the freedom she had fought for.